When I was a kid and I was first being introduced to live music performances, I was most fascinated by when the bands would just jam. Nobody was singing, everybody was just taking turns playing. It was absolutely fantastic. I couldn't believe how much excitement these guys could generate. I would go to a lot of bluegrass festivals when I was a kid, and so it's a genre of music that leans pretty heavily on some high-level technical expertise. I didn't know what they were doing. I didn't know how they were doing it. All I knew is that it really got me pumped up, and I loved to watch it. I was so fascinated by how they could move their hands with such precision. Much later in life, when I finally learned how to play an instrument, I began to get into improvising, just like every musician does as they go along on their journey. And there were certain things that I heard along the way from friends and from teachers, and I would say that when I started out, I had learned a minor pentatonic scale, and I would just, kind of run around up and down in that scale as fast as I could, and I could recognize that type of scale was used in a lot of rock and roll songs, and that, I could feel my way through it. I hadn't quite gotten to the point yet where I could transcribe music and play anything that I heard, but I could kind of imitate it. Not super accurately all the time, but that was the beginning. Later on, after I went to music school and got exposed to music theory and all that business, and it became a little bit more of an organized landscape for me, I realized that basically soloing on an instrument or improvising on any instrument can be broken down into a few categories. And I would say the two most prominent ones would be structural improvisation and textural improvisation. And of the 5 songs that I played, they each fit into one of those categories, with a couple of exceptions where maybe you could put an asterisk next to whatever category you would put them in. So for the first song that I played, which was Ramblin' Man by the Allman Brothers, it's in the key of G sharp, and I would call that a textural type of solo. It's basically a G sharp major pentatonic scale, and while the chords go from the G sharp to a C sharp and G sharp and C sharp and D sharp, or 1-4 and then 1-4-5, the solo melody itself doesn't necessarily really drive that home. I mean, nowhere in that do you really get a strong sense of where the chords are changing. If you've heard the song a bunch of times, you would probably be able to have a sense of where they change, but it's not really spelled out in the solo. The next song that I played was Sultans of Swing by Dire Straits, and that chord progression is D minor to C to B flat to A. So, and those licks are very structural. You can practically hear the whole chord progression inside the solo. I mean, that first sequence kind of runs you right through the chords, especially that A chord gets spelled out completely. The next solo that I played was from Hotel California, and it's the first solo section, and that one's probably one of the most, structurally sound solos in rock guitar history. That first, the chord progression is, for the segment I played, is B minor to F major, F sharp major, to A, E. And those first licks, I mean, that first lick is really almost spelling out a B minor chord. So that's the 5th scale degree 7, tonic of the B, a minor 3rd bend up to the D, which is the 3rd of the B minor chord. And then the conclusion of that lick comes down onto an A sharp, which is the major 3rd of the F sharp chord. And then so we get into that. That lick is a little more colorful. It's over the A, and it's not really. It's going more for the A sus sound. And then finally to the E, playing that G sharp of the E chord. Then we get into the Stairway to Heaven solo segment that I played, and it's a textural solo. But this would get the asterisk, because when the chord progression, which is A minor, G, F, when it goes down to the F, Jimmy Page almost always plays an F note, and it really kicks up the excitement of the solo because you've got these flurries in A minor pentatonic. That's right, when the band comes down on that. Again with that F. When I learned this song as a kid, I figured it out wrong. I didn't have a transcription. I was just playing along with the record. That was kind of how I spent my high school, just picking up the needle, putting it back at the beginning of Led Zeppelin 4 and playing through side 1 and then side 2. And I didn't have a super discriminating ear at that point, and I had not yet figured out that those were Fs. But let me tell you, the day that I realized that, it was like the sun rose for the first time for me on that song. I was so pumped up. So finally, we get into the AC/DC song. The solo progression is just A, D, and then G, D. A, D, G, D. And so it's a repetitive, short progression that doesn't have a lot of like harmonic momentum in it. I mean, super energized by the overall arrangement and the way the bass player and the drummer are all playing. But that's a very repetitive lick, and it's A key centered, and I mean, it's the standard Chuck Berry type stuff, but it doesn't really like do much to nail the chords. There is one lick in there which happens over the D chord, and it's a good sound, playing that F sharp, which is the third of the D chord. And then Angus plays a little like kind of a country blues lick, which also outlines an A chord pretty directly, but I still don't feel like this solo is as structural as it is textural and rhythmic. And rhythm elements is a part of lead guitar improvisation that can be applied, but it's more like a subcategory to texture or structural. So anyway, there's 5 bits for you to think about. This is not necessarily a how to play those things, although I'll attach some tabs to the description for the solo segments that I did play, and maybe that'll help get you started. But what I would rather that you think about is that these different soloing approaches are kind of dictated by what information you've been exposed to. If you're a beginner or intermediate level guitar player, you might have learned some scales or patterns. You may lean heavily on textural style improvisation if you don't understand what it means to target a chord tone. A chord tone is playing a note from the chord that's being played, particularly on the downbeat. And that is going to emphasize the change. And it's the reason the Sultans of Swing chord progression and the solo interlock so well. It's the same reason that Hotel California and almost all the solos in that interlock so well with the chords. And it's like they're reinforcing each other the whole time. Any soloist who can carry the chord progression in their improvisations is going to have a lot of freedom in what they can express on their instrument, and also the power to influence the band. Because if you're doing a good job at spelling out the harmony, you can start to introduce notes into the harmony that hopefully, if you have a group of people you play for that are listening to what you're playing, that they'll start to incorporate some of those changes, and it can really evolve what's happening in the ensemble. One thing I would recommend, if you are a beginner or intermediate guitar player, maybe this is another video I could do, it would be learning a few different patterns of dominant 7th arpeggios. so that you can play like a standard A blues would have an A7, a D7, and an E7. And if you learn them all in one position, so I just played like a quick change. Now, so there's three dominant seven, A7, D7, and E7, all in one position, and so I played completely structurally for a 12-bar blues. That'll be another video. Maybe that'll be the next one I do next week. If there's any interest in that, let me know in the comments, and I could elaborate a whole lot more. But that's really like the place where the blues gets interesting if you're just playing pentatonic scales, major or minor pentatonic scale, being able to target chord tones in your blues soloing. That's a real door to open, and it sort of definitely get you out of a rut. And if your rut is that you're playing too many chord tones, I don't think your audiences will complain. Okay, thank you for hanging out with me today on this more opinion and observational style of video, rather than an instructive, like here's how you play this particular song. Hopefully it opened your ears and your eyes to some other approaches to playing. It might help you spot some weaknesses that you need to develop, and it may help you realize, hey, I've already got a handle on this textural thing. Cool, now I just need to get a little structure in there, mix it all up, combine some rhythmic sequences in there, and then you can take structure and texture and put them together into, kind of a hybrid of the two. Okay, I'll see you in the next video.